for good or evil, this is what happens when you have a pure spirit that is fighting
A decadent
a
spirit.
decadent spirit, essentially. Yeah, exactly. And so this is how a lot of the Arab world sees the cycle of history. So it's rather than two forces, democracy versus anti-democracy, battling it out, and then coming up with some new way of being. They really see it as the pure spirit of the people overcoming the decadence that has happened.
So is this a history lesson? Is this what we're doing? Because normally you're
No.
talking, you have a mission with like rocks or what
No,
are you
I don't.
doing?
I don't want to do a history lesson. What I want to do is I want to think about how the Arab world, sort of in general, has seen what has just happened in Syria, and I want to show how this can apply to us, because it's a different way to think about history.
How do you know how the Arab world has seen what is? I don't know how the Arab world sees what has happened. In Syria.
I've studied a couple of historians from different cultures, and one in particular, Ibn Khaldun, was just a brilliant writer in the 13th century, 14th century, in the regions of Baghdad, really. And so he's writing about what was happening at the time when the Mongols were coming in, and he's seen cultures be overthrown. And he talks about how this happens. And so a lot of the Arab world has a sense of history from this, and he's the guy who has inspired my spirals in my art. The idea of cyclical, but moving back again to where you came from.
This Khaldun.
Ibn Khaldun, he wrote the Muqaddimah. The Muqaddimah is the central philosophy of our Kung Fu art.
He wrote the Muqaddimah of Silat?
No, the Muqaddimah of Silat is taken from the Muqaddimah of Ibn Khaldun.
Really?
And the idea of the cycle of history. Yes, it's a direct quote of that.
Huh.
And so I've been interested in this for quite some time. And
Okay.
I want to take this idea of how history works, and I want to apply it to what's going on in our country, for example. I think it's useful to have different ways to think about it. And, we tend to go with a Western understanding of, Marxist history, the dialectic and all this kind of stuff. And there are other ways to look at history, and there are other frameworks to do it in. And a lot of the world is using this other kind of spiral nature of history rather than a dialectical one. So it's not just two forces coming together to produce a third thing, but it's something always returning back to
When
its
you
source.
say two forces, that the Western dialectic, would that be good and evil? Like, what are the two forces that
It's whatever kind of contest there is. So in our country, we're built on a dialectic of two parties,
Right. Okay.
and they're always trying to produce the other thing. And the Arab world has not often had that kind of two-party model, and I suspect that a lot of it is coming from this kind of view of history. So anyway, I want to go back to really the shock of what we just saw happen in Syria, as a small group of not well-armed rebels took over a large country with a much, much larger military and relatively world-class equipment. It may be a little bit second level, but provided by Russia with a full-on air force and missile defense systems and all of this, and attack helicopters.
They have, if not the most up to date, they have contemporary weapons.
They have contemporary weaponry, and they were beaten by a bunch of guys with machine guns on trucks, and a very small amount of people compared to their total army. Tiny numbers. So how could these things happen?
And it seems to have caught everyone by surprise.
Pretty much everyone by surprise. And how can it happen so quickly? And so there was a journalist for Al Jazeera, Ibrahim al-Marashi, who described how Ibn Khaldun had predicted exactly this kind of sudden collapse of groups and of even whole societies. And he, so Ibn Khaldun was writing, as I mentioned, in the 14th century. He was watching the Mongol invasion. He watched the Mongols come and do the exact same thing that the rebels just did. They came through the same series of cities, because that's how you have to do it to get to Damascus. And you conquer the first one, then you conquer Homs, and then you enter Damascus. And so the Mongols did that in basically exactly the same kind of way, and it happened very, very quickly. And so Ibn Khaldun is all about the circular or spiral nature of history.
You're talking 600-700 years ago.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Okay.
And how there's these repetitions. We talk about it rhyming, or first time is tragedy, second time is farce. This is a different kind of way of thinking about it. This is thinking about how there is these forces that drive things forward, but they have to follow certain paths, and we see these paths over and over again. And so, if an army wants to get to Damascus, they're going to go through these cities, and if there is effective resistance in these cities, they're not getting to Damascus. But if there isn't, the path is open. And so he saw it happen in a matter of days, and we saw it happen in a matter of days. And so this journalist for Al Jazeera was like, we should mention this. This has happened before, and people have said it will happen again.
And look,
it happened again. Exactly. Yeah. And so there's this word to describe the spirit of a people that is used in Ibn Khaldun, and even Western scholars who study him tend to downplay it, because it sounds like you're talking about jihadism. It sounds like you're talking about fanatics, and it certainly has some resonance with those ideas. But the spirit of a people doesn't have to be, the will of the Reich. It doesn't have to be that kind of spirit. It can be.
It doesn't have to be the basest of the spirits.
Right, right. You can have a spirit that is the people, and it's not the triumph of the will.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So it's dangerous to talk about spirits driving groups of people, because it can be dangerous. And this is why we're a little bit afraid of what's happening in Syria right now. And, this is why, we're often scared of populist movements, because it's the spirit of the people is a terrifying thing.
Yes.
And it's powerful, very, very powerful. And things can change very, very quickly.
The spirit of the people can quickly turn into mob mentality.
And, this is what, V was specifically referencing.
I love that movie.
The powers of V haven't heard the voice of the people in a long time, and it's a lot louder than they remember.
Yeah.
And this is how a lot of the Arab world sees the cycle of history. I think I saw it best described in T. Lawrence's 7 Pillars of Wisdom. So this is Lawrence of Arabia was writing about the British and the Ottomans in the Arabian Peninsula, and his role in trying to organize things. And people criticize him, saying, you were just colonialist, and the Arabs had their own uprising. All that aside, he was right in the middle of all of this, watching the spirit of the people, watching it develop, and he had read Ibn Khaldun. So he knew what he was involved in. And so he was part of...
And when he was talking about this is what he was talking about.
This is about what he was talking about. So he was part of a tribal spirit, scary and wonderful as that might be. Something where people can ride camels out of the desert and take a modern city. And he did that more than once. Now, whether it was his idea or the other people's idea, it certainly wasn't his spirit. But he knew what he was onto and how he was trying to make these things happen. And so that's, definitely there's manipulation in there, and there's colonial aspects in there. But as a person involved in the movement, he was very, very aware as a scholar of what was happening. He was an Arab scholar who had been basically drafted by the British to just throw him into this. And, by all accounts, he honestly cared for the people he was trying to work with, and thought that the Ottomans were bad, and everyone else he was with thought the Ottomans were bad. And so some British help was welcomed, essentially. But they never gave any heavy weapons, because they didn't trust them. The British did not trust the Arabs at all. And so that's the part where it's, gets colonialist. But you see Lawrence arguing all these things. So anyway, in the Seven Pillars of Wisdom,
like from what you're saying, the movie was pretty true to a lot of this.
Yeah, relatively. I mean, he liked to hype himself. It definitely seemed like he was putting himself in front of a bunch of people who were running in that direction.
Yes.
But that he did that.
Yeah.
And that's a thing that he did.
Is.
Yeah, and they put him on a white camel, which he then accidentally shot in the back of the head.
That part I didn't know.
Yeah, didn't get into the movie. He goes charging in, he's waving his gun around, he's got the prettiest, tallest camel of all of them. He's been awarded this, and he points his gun at the first person he sees, pulls the trigger, and he shoots his own camel in the back of the head.
Goodness gracious.
Yeah, a lot of bad things happened. He wasn't as successful all the time as the movie made it. But yeah, anyway, he writes about how this spirit works as you get these cities full of decadence, and the government becomes decadent, and the people become decadent under the government.
Okay,
yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And there's corruption at all levels, and nothing works without the corruption. And the people
not quite there yet.
And the people start to hate their government, their city. They hate what's happening all the time. They hate it because they feel, they feel the taxes, but they feel the also the loss of the taxes. They feel, they're paying money to the government to defend them, and at the same time, they can't get their caravans through the desert without getting attacked. So they feel that the government isn't serving their needs, and they feel that they're basically working to make the powers that be wealthy while they are suffering. And so what happens out in the desert is, as Lawrence was putting it, you're alone there in the desert with nothing but you and the sun. And you start to redefine monotheism, and you start to think about the one truth, and you start to think about those cities are really decadent. And you rise up with your group of people from the desert and you crush the cities. And this happens over and over and over again. And that this is the cycle of what Ibn Khaldun was seeing in the 14th century, right? So very far from any kind of, democratic movements, he's seeing the nomadic tribal people from the steppes of, Western Asia pouring into Baghdad, these like incredibly sophisticated, advanced cultures with the best weapons in the world, large fortresses with huge walls getting crushed by, people on ponies who, were now ruling much of the world. And he was seeing this as for good or evil. This is what happens when you have a pure spirit that is fighting
a decadent spirit.
A decadent spirit, essentially. Yeah, exactly. And so this is how a lot of the Arab world sees the cycle of history. So it's rather than two forces, democracy versus anti-democracy, battling it out and then coming up with some new way of being. They really see it as the pure spirit of the people overcoming the decadence that has happened. And this is absolutely what had happened under Assad, so that things were incredibly decadent. The army was essentially, forced to fight at gunpoint and paid almost nothing. There was no army in many cases. The good commanders, who were only paid $10 a month, while their soldiers were paid $1 a month, would just send their soldiers home so that they could get jobs. And then the good commanders would collect the soldiers' money, so they had a decent salary of maybe $100 a month. And so, this was true all through the ranks. And so if the cruel commanders made their soldiers stay there and then just used them to collect, payoffs from the people, and the better ones sent them home and collected the money, either way, there was basically no army. And the army dissolved as soon as they were faced. And if you think about what actually happened in terms of the rebels were on the outskirts of Homs. They weren't anywhere near Damascus when the suburbs of Damascus rose up. It wasn't actually the rebels who took Damascus. It was Damascus that took Damascus.
Really?
It was the people on the outskirts, just basically looking out their windows and the army's gone, and then just walking into the streets. And the more that happened, the more the army was gone. And the army never fought anyone. They just became those people in the streets or left. A lot of them went home. I was reading about someone,
But there had been other assaults. Why was this one the one where it all dissolved?
Okay, so this happened exactly the same way the first time. The first time the rebels were coming in from Aleppo, the army started defecting, and most of the rebel army were former soldiers. And then it was Iran and Russia that just started bombing them and providing air support.
So this is solely because of Russia is occupied in Ukraine, and Iran is occupied with all of its what do they call
all its proxies?
Proxies working and fighting in Israel.
No, it's also losing.
Right.
It's losing heavily. I mean,
it's been more than decimated.
Not pro whatever this sort of genocide thing is happening, but in terms of Israel taking on proxies of Iran, it's been doing an amazing job.
Well, it was
terrible. Other things aside,
terrible job, but an amazing job of being
like
incredibly terrible in fighting a war. Yes.
One of the things that was stopping keeping all of these pieces on the table and stopping Syria from being overthrown by the rebels was the huge stockpile of missiles in Lebanon. And they were enough to destroy Tel Aviv. And so Israel was like, no, they're not. They're gone now. All of those are gone, and the commanders are gone, and that's all gone now. And at the same time, who had been defending Syria? It had been the Wagner Group. It was,
right.
And they're gone,
right?
And it had been the Russian military and their air force, and they had to go to Ukraine. So
how long until this rot infects into Iran and Russia? Like it seems like that.
I don't know, but there's a whole bunch of dominoes that are falling. So Israel took out one of the 4 Russian-made air defense systems around Tehran. And then, not saying how, it took out the other 3. Tehran now has no effective air defense systems. And so basically it's been put in check, so that the way Tel Aviv had been threatened by Hezbollah before with a bunch of missiles, now Tehran itself has been put into this threatened position.
And this morning, today is Wednesday, December 18th. This morning, you heard about the Russian general who was assassinated by a targeted explosion.
No, I did not.
Inside Moscow.
Wow. Yeah. No. Things are happening. So Syria was the staging ground for everything that's been happening in Africa by Russia. So the Russian mercenaries, again, the Wagner Group, have been based in Syria and then doing all of this stuff in Africa. I mean, it won't collapse immediately, and it will probably end up, leaving a vacuum that the Chinese will fill. But yes, a lot of those businesses by the military oligarchs with their mercenaries digging up gold and blood diamonds.
Well, get ready for the American oligarchs.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think we're nearly down the same path of evil as they are, but yes, we're definitely moving in that direction. And so that's what I wanted to mention is this cycle of history and how we've basically, through manipulation of our desires, of our democratic desires to make our lives better, we have gotten into this situation where we have 2 groups fighting each other and letting the oligarchs win. And so you have rural areas fighting the elites who they see as us, and we're trying to, demand equality between races and genders, and we're trying to fight for these things. And at the meantime, we're just being crushed by immense income inequality, which is the underlying problem for everything we see. And the only reason that can exist in a democracy is if we vote for our own inequality. And we are doing that in, large numbers because we're distracted by the demons that were shown by, media on all sides, essentially.
Well, we're also told over the zero-sum relationship.
Right.
I mean, you've spoken. What is the name of that experiment where they're offered,
Oh yeah,
do you want more?
I'll talk about that in a second. But yes,
you've spoken of it before. That's why I wanted to bring it up.
Yeah, no, it's a really excellent example. But yeah, there is no organization conspiring to keep us down, and we've also spoken of that.
Yes.
But there is a manipulation of, I don't know, the thought space that we live in. So there are these two sides fighting against ourselves, and the people have no voice. So we don't develop an asabaya to overthrow our shackles, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not talking about in a Marxist sense of a rising of the proletariat. I'm talking much, much more of, we all know we're getting screwed. And I think if we all acted together, we are completely unstoppable. And what seems like a edifice that cannot be ever overcome, the walls of Baghdad are, 300 feet high and cannot be breached. They're, 40 feet thick, fall in an afternoon, because the people inside are already revolting.
But then what about states' rights? I mean, the very states' rights has changed into a way to keep us divided and arguing amongst ourselves.
All of these things are true. All of these things are, psychological techniques that are being used essentially by us against us to keep the oligarchs in power, and it's the only way they can stay that way. So you were just mentioning these psychological experiments that were done. I think it was at Harvard, where they were taking economics, I think graduate students, people who should really know better, and offering people, I'll give you $5 and I'll give everyone else in the class $1. And people are like, okay, that sounds great. Or I'll give you $10 and I'll give everyone else in the class $20. And we're like, that sounds terrible because I have less money than everyone else. So even though you have twice as much money in real terms, you went from $5 to $10, you don't want it. You would rather have $5 and everyone else have $1. As a economist grad student at Harvard, where you don't need the money. So this is all just a game to you because you're looking at the numbers on it.
But you didn't win.
And you only win if you have more than everyone else. It's not about how much you have yourself. And so these are the psychological games that we're using to defeat ourselves. And this is what I mean. Like, you don't need a conspiracy to make you believe that. This is built into our psyche. And the way capitalism works, we all think we're going to win the lottery. And so you have people voting for oligarchs because they want to be an oligarch. I mean, that's one reason. There's a whole bunch of other ones. Again, divide and conquer, the race baiting that's constantly going on. All of that is part of creating this division so that the voice of the people doesn't exist. Or
so that it seems that the voice of the people is speaking in the words of the oligarchs.
In the words of the oligarchs, exactly. Is calling for a boot on our necks. And this is what the Syrian army was forced to do. It wasn't just they had to shoot at the rebels. They also had to chant the name of Bashar Assad and say his family was the divine family, and that they were more important than God. And definitely this is another group that we're seeing come in here that follows much more of the sort of original idea of the Asabaya, where there's definitely a religious component to it.
Asabaya?
The spirit of the people. The idea of, no, there is a God and it's not Bashar.
Yeah.
And that is part of what enabled them to win.
Unfortunately here, though, I don't think we're in the point where we're congealing yet. I think that some things need to happen, and that's unfortunate. It feels like everyone is tired and waiting to see.
Well, I think so. For example, we have religious people who are very fundamentalist in this country.
Oh, yes, we do.
And much like in Syria, they're not in the majority, but when they move, they have a lot of power. And
because they move together.
And because they have this spirit to a certain extent. I think a lot of it is artificial. I think the mega churches are basically corporate shill money machines that are milking again the spirit of the people. But if they moved away from that kind of corruption, and we saw something that was uniting the American people, just the way Syria had been united between the sort of modern cosmopolitan city dwellers who wanted Bashar Assad out, and the people from the hinterlands who are, going for, the one true God and conquering in his name, who are like, no, Bashar is not God. There is no God but God. And, being successful because of that. But it wasn't them. It wasn't their fundamentalist belief that made it happen, but it was the purity of their spirit enabled them to start moving. And then the people rose up, and it wasn't them who conquered Damascus. It was Damascus that conquered Damascus.
Well, I mean, it took a whole lot of pain. It took 50 years of torture and pain for them to get there. And that's not an exaggeration. That's
and we
not
can't
hyperbole.
afford that.
It's like, if we have to go through 50 years, we're going to look the way Syria looks. We're going to have ruined institutions. I really hope not, cities.
But I think we are. I think we're seeing it happening. I think we're in that period of pain. I think we have been since 2016, maybe earlier.
No, we are nowhere near that level.
Not in terms of civil war, but I think so again, spiraling cycle of history. I don't think we're going towards, shelling and tanks in the cities. I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think we're in a civil war. I think we are in a different kind of war where it's the same patterns, but at the next time around the cycle.
Well, we got to start seeing it as a war soon, or there's going to be a lot lost before there's any
And
gains.
what I'm saying is, I don't generally think about the religious factions in this country and their power, but when you think about these words and what just happened in Syria and the nature of the spirit of the people, when you have both a joining of the secular people, the scholars, and the fundamentalists who do not have scholarship coming together and realizing that their false idols must be cast down, I think something really truly fundamental can happen. And I think
we just saw it. But the question is, how long will it take for us to get to that point?
Well, if I think if the right wing fundamentalists realized that Trump is not actually the second coming and supporting Jesus, which they fully do.
But he is.
That is what they believe, but I think that they might find otherwise.
The things that they want to see fulfilled, like he's following through on his promises to them.
I don't think he is.
The ones that are important, the judges, the justices, things that are going to last generations.
Most of that is important to the oligarchs. Most of that is removing the regulations and putting in a power system that will allow the oligarchs to get richer.
But still, I don't think we are nearly at the point where these different. I understand what you're saying, but for all these different groups in America to come together,
I agree,
and see that they have the same false idols.
Okay. So here's something interesting. We have been caught in, I think, almost a fundamentalist Marxist view of history in, I think, all of the Western world, where we only see advance through destruction, and where, communist infiltrators try and destroy a country so that communism can be victorious. That is a classic thing that the communist view of history
will bring you to where you need us. And
I have heard of many people saying that the only way America can get better is through its complete destruction. And I think that is essentially a Marxist view of the destruction and then the renewal coming from the ashes of the old world.
Wasn't that Newt Gingrich's plan for the House and the Senate?
I think Newt he's a historian. He's also coming from this same world. I'm trying to say that there are other ways to think about it. And so this is a Syrian and Arabic, Arabic historian way of the cycle of history of we have a pathway. We're not going to follow exactly the same pathway as before. we're not going to go through a civil war, but we're going to have a civil war of ideas, and it might be almost as painful as a civil war, where, you know, you have, as you mentioned, the cities will start to suck. They're not going to be bombarded, but they're going to be tortured.
We'll be back to the 70s when you couldn't wheel a cart down the
and they're
sidewalk,
busing in immigrants who like have nothing into the streets homeless, with
literally homeless in the streets.
All of this is being created. Absolutely. This is definitely happening, but this is you know, the next cycle. I don't think we need a full on Marxist destruction and then a recreation.
What you're talking about in terms of the cycle, that everything is cyclical, is that instead of like things being destroyed and then built back better, where there's a progressive idea in a history as a progression towards a better future, you're saying even though the tools that we have change and maybe some of the methods that we use change, humanity is humanity, and we keep coming back around to the same
absolutely
thing again,
but it's a spiral. It's not a circle. There is improvement. So Ibn Khaldun saw evolution as a spiral. He saw that humans evolved from monkeys because monkeys were the closest to humans, and we'd come back around and we were still monkeys, but we'd come up another level. And he did see society this way. And so I do think there's hope in this kind of sense of history. There's hope in the Marxist sense too, that everything will be destroyed and we'll grow up from the ashes. But I kind of like this idea. I'm a little scared by the idea of the spirit of the people, and I think we should be scared of that. But it's really the only way.
Right now, the spirit of the people doesn't feel like it's very positive. It doesn't feel very good. It doesn't. No,
because it's been manipulated to support the ultra wealthy, and somehow, you know, the rural people who hadn't been to college, who all worship in these mega churches, all voted for the oligarchs, and we see them now ruling us. But that is a system where you've got a mountain sitting on a nail, and it's just not stable. It's going to fall over. And it's very heavy on that nail.
I mean, I loved seeing the Assad bedrooms doors. Right. The doors were 1.5 feet thick, and there was all sorts of security measures, but none of it was ever used. None of it ever mattered.
None of that mattered. Not when the whole people is against you.
He knew that the only thing to do was to immediately leave. What are you going to do? Lock yourself inside a room and stay in that room for how long? Like
no, that was in case his own guards had a palace coup. He could wait until some other guards got there. But that wasn't for when the whole people.
There were no other guards.
There were no other guards. There. Exactly. Yeah. No, I mean, this is the same thing that ISIS did when it took over Mosul. There was, you know, hundreds of thousands of Iraqi troops in Mosul, and like 50,000 ISIS people took it over. And it's happened again and again in recent history, where people with a clear view, good or bad, have taken over whole modern cities. In the Middle East recently, or Afghanistan. Not even the Middle East.
6-day war. There were like boots left in the sand.
As soon as we left Afghanistan, a much larger, much better equipped Afghani force fell to the Taliban in days. Just days. Because they all just put down their weapons and left.
Because why would they fight?
They had no clear vision. And so, again, this doesn't have to happen necessarily on the forces of good. Sometimes it happens on the forces of fundamentalism. But you see, that was a corrupt modern state that it was functioning sort of, but as soon as it met any resistance, it fell instantly. And I think we could be at any moment on the edge of this kind of thing. This is what we were talking about with Jed. At one point, I was asking him about, you know, how do you see the future? And he said, well, it's sort of like a bankruptcy where you see things progressing and it's very, very slow and you think it's never going to end. And then suddenly it all happens at once. All the bills come due. There's nothing in the bank, and it's a collapse of everything across the board.
All at once.
And that there are a lot of systems like this.
Everything's fine until it's not.
And, you know, we do tend to see this in the sort of, again, the absolute Marxist terms of, you know, one side getting crushed so the other one wins. But it's interesting to think of it in a spiral fashion where you're coming back at another level, and there's good and bad in that.
As long as my 5-year-old son says, as long as we level up.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean,
that's the idea.
Because like if we don't level up, then it's just the same thing again and again with different toys and
well, you
day.
don't know where you are in the spiral. You could be on the part that's getting worse before you're getting back.
It's very Marvel multiverse-ish. I don't like it, but yeah, it feels like this kind of philosophy definitely. There's an appeal to it. There's
okay, so
an appeal.
let's get back to some things where we understand the philosophy at a different level. So the Mukaddima in our style, which was based after the Mukaddima of Ibn Khaldun. When you say
in our style, you're talking about Silat Kung Fu.
Yes, so it's an Indonesian, originally, Chinese Kung Fu brought to Indonesia and taking on things from the Muslim world, including this idea of Ibn Khaldun's history and the Mukaddima. Mm-hmm. And so with a completely different spelling, it's called the Mukaddima, and it talks about going from nature and returning to nature. Mm-hmm. And so we take what's natural and we learn these unnatural moves and we make them natural again, but now we've leveled up.
Right.
And we've come around that circle back up to another level, and then we do it again.
By making the unnatural natural.
And so we go back to the very beginning and we learn our fundamentals again, and we make that same circle again, and we come back and we're at another level. Mm-hmm. And so this is a really interesting way to think about advancement and history that I think is useful and that we don't really have in our existing culture.
I mean, there's no doubt you bring it up in our physical practice, but there's also no doubt in our in our very lives the lessons that we learn when we're younger, we need to learn them again
and again, but hopefully at a better level.
Like hopefully I have a more subtle understanding of what I'm doing this time, but I'm like, oh my goodness, I forgot that, and now I have to learn that shit again. But at least I have a bigger world. Yeah.
All right, I want to. I think we can finish some of this thinking about it as. Yeah, we don't know where we are on the cycle, but we have the potential for in continued improvement, even if sometimes it seems like we're going back to places we've been before. It's
definitely a hopeful message, and I like it in this very, very unsettled time.
Thank you.
All right, folks. Until next time, thanks so much for listening. Take care.
Thank you for listening to Mind Body Evolution with Dr. Josh Stout and Eric Burkell.